Pawcast, and it is a podcast takeover. I'm Dr. Brown. Dr. Westbrook isn't here today, but we are going to be talking about breed behavior traits. Alrighty, so for starts, this is Mason, way over yonder. He is a 2-year-old Australian cattle dog. He is a volunteer favorite, actually. He likes to be a big old puppy and play all the time. He is house trained, he gives the best hugs, and he is very affectionate. And we even think he enjoys playing with dogs, so you gotta come and see him at some point. So back to the topic, we have the dog breed behavior traits, right? A lot of questions arise about, does my dog do this because of its breed? Or is this weird because I didn't expect this out of my dog based on the breed I was getting? There's lots of questions about it, and we're gonna dive in. We'll talk a little bit about how we kind of organize those breeds in groups, and then we'll talk a little bit about kind of the characteristics for some of those breeds, and then we'll tap into some more questions as they come up on the screen with y'all. For starts, there's 7 main breed groups. These were first kind of bunched together by the AKC, and we usually use that across the board. So those are your sporting, your non-sporting, your hound, your herding, your toy, your terrier, and your working breed groups. With that being said, there are some kind of characteristics that are associated with both of those, and the reason being kind of starts way back at the beginning when breeding first began for domesticated animals. Essentially, people saw traits and characteristics in different animals that they really wanted to kind of see follow through for like the young as they bred those animals. And so what you got was over generations and generations of kind of selecting for these traits, you got what we call breed characteristics. And so that's why we can all say, oh yeah, my Dobie does that too. Or we can say, yeah, my German Shepherd dog's just like that, because they've kind of over time fine-tuned those for things that we like about them for the most part. With that being said, sporting examples will be Labrador Retrievers, Golden Retrievers. You also have your Spaniels, almost all of your Spaniels, not all of your Spaniels. Like the Cocker Spaniel, for example, but not the Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. That one actually falls in the toy group. You also have Terriers, like your American Staffordshire Terrier. You also have terriers like the West Highland White Terrier, but also not in that group is the Yorkshire Terrier, also favorably known as Yorkie, that actually falls in your toy group as well. With that, you also have working breeds like the Boxer, you have working breeds like the Doberman, and you also have non-sporting breeds, and those non-sporting breeds include things such as...
Can you give some examples of some like herding group, like some pets that are categorized in the herding group?
Yeah, so we'll tap back into that here in a second. I had a question, sorry guys. Yes, so as far as you said the herding group goes, they're very intelligent, and they're very active breeds. And so what you'll find is that they really need to be stimulated both mentally and physically. Because of that, essentially, the general walk won't necessarily do. They're very high energy breeds. You need to kind of really drive them, and so things like hiking regularly, or having your dog on a leash while you go biking, or more kind of extensive workouts like that will keep them happy. They're not necessarily ideal to have just in the backyard every day. They need a little bit more focus and a little bit more drive than that.
And I think some questions came in. If you want to check them to see.
Yeah, let's see. Okay, yeah, perfect. So one of the questions that came in is, have some traits gotten lost through the years? That's a tough question. So first starts, it's kind of like a yes and a no. For example, bulldogs. Bulldogs were originally bred for bull baiting. some of the traits that help them be really, really good at that are being tenacious, are being confident. Those still exist in the bulldog, but as the bull baiting sport became unfavorable, right, we adjusted and fine-tuned some of those traits, and so they really used to be a very like sturdy, very kind of larger, like intimidating looking dog, right? And so we bred them down a bit so that they kind of are a little more friendly and a little more clumsy, like, very, very attractive, since that's no longer their role anymore. But then you do have dogs like the Great Pyrenees, and it was bred to protect property that had flocks on them. And those are still active today on lots of ranches, especially here in Texas. Great Pyrenees still guard and protect their land, by far, for sure. The Dalmatian was once to assist with carriage drivers, and really their role was a protection role as well. And although they don't ride on carriages anymore, they still are very loyal and quite protective of their home and their family as well sometimes.
And somebody came asked, they have a dog that's part of like a herd group. What kind of jobs can help them keep stimulated? Because obviously they don't own a farm, they can't just have them go to sheep. So what can they do to kind of keep those specific traits?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes what we recommend is obedience classes or agility training. There's other like competitions, protection competitions, things like that nature would really help keep both their mind and their body adept.
And then you mentioned spaniels, and some of them fall into two different groups. So what were they kind of trained for?
So majority of your spaniels fall in the sporting group, and with that, it was a lot of hunting things. We have some that will hunt birds, some that will hunt other things, but typically, that was their role. They were to assist the hunters back in the day.
And if somebody, got a protected, breed dog, should they be used to guard homes or property, or is that not, something that they need to do anymore?
Yeah, I guess we have to leave that up a little bit to owner preference. Nowadays, there's not as much need for that protection, but say you're a rancher, like the Great Pyrenees reference, and you still want to make sure that, say your cattle or your goats are still safe throughout the night and things, then breeds like that definitely can still be utilized for protection. There's a protection competition that the Malinois are involved in quite often, and so it's not necessarily that they actually protect whatever home they're at, but it's just a competition to kind of identify all of those protection characteristics that were once bred for. They still use German Shepherd dogs and Malinois for protection as well, especially like on behalf of the police.
Yeah.
Or the police, excuse me. Let's see. Dobermans also kind of tap into that same concept with competition as well as protection. So they very much so can still be used for it, and they still carry those traits pretty innately.
If somebody wants to own a Husky in Houston, what are some things to keep in mind?
Yeah. Yeah, very good. So first thing is Huskies are high energy. I believe they're part of the working group category. And so with that, they exactly that. They need work, right? With that high energy. You don't really want to keep them tucked in the apartment all day or in the house all day. They definitely need that physical stimulation as well. And then another big thing to consider is that these are double-coated dogs that were originally bred to be like running across frozen expanses, like in really cold temperatures. And so when it comes to Houston, especially, and the heat during the summer months for sure, just making sure your animal isn't overheated is very key with that double coat. They do technically shed their undercoat, but still overheating is always a concern for them. You can manage that with adequate water supply, appropriate shading, / coverage when needed, things of that nature.
Is there any reason my Jack Russell Terrier is obsessed with squirrels?
Okay, that's a good question. So yes, essentially, if you go back to their breeding, what you'll find is that all terriers were also, for the most part, bred for hunting, But specifically, most terriers were bred for rodent hunting rather than, like, say, birds or something, or like deer of that nature. And so what you'll find is that they have a high prey drive, whether that's the Parson Russell Terrier, the Russell Terrier, whether that is the miniature Schnauzer, which is actually part of the terrier group. They see prey animals, right? And they are like, oh my gosh, I'm going crazy behind it. But it's a part of what they were bred for, and it's a part of their character.
And it's kind of rare to see this kind of breed that come under the ones that have more of a matted fur.
Yeah.
Or like, is there a science behind why they have that fur, and does it actually hurt? Because that's our first, thought.
Yeah. So the preferred term is that they have a corded coat, and so those individual strands of kind of like collected hair are called cords, rather than, say, some people call them dreadlocks, some people call them matting, but technically they're cords, just by definition. And they usually don't hurt when managed with special grooming, special care, special time, and they don't usually smell either. But it's when you start getting a lack of appropriate care that you start seeing kind of some of those concerning things. But for the most part, they don't hurt, and they don't really necessarily mad as long as they're taken well care of.
Good to know. I've always been so curious about that. Is it true that dogs with blue-black tongues are Chow mixes?
$1 million question. Yes and no. So the Chow is hereditarily known to have the blue tongue. That is a characteristic of that breed, absolutely. Does that mean that if it is mixed with a Chow, it could have the bluish black marks on its tongue? Yes, it can. However, it doesn't mean that it has to be a Chow mix. There are actually plenty of purebreds, like Labrador Retriever purebreds, that will also have darkly pigmented tongue as well in different places.
Is it a recessive gene or a dominant gene, do you think? Those are pretty weird. Yeah.
We'll look into it.
And which dog is considered the tallest?
Oh, wow. Okay. Gosh. Okay. Pulling on some memory here. So I can give you about 3 of the tallest dog breeds, respectively. And so you've got the Irish Wolfhound, you've got the Scottish Deerhound, you've got the Great Dane, just to name 3. Of those, it's quite variable, right? Per individual dog, which ones are going to be what heights, right? Because there's always a range for those. But I can, off the top of my head, remember a dog named Zeus, who was a Great Dane, who was actually known to be one of the tallest dogs in the world. I don't know if that record's been broken, but I do know it was a Great Dane at one point in time. And he was, I think, over 7 feet tall standing on his hind feet, and he was 3 feet tall, 3 feet 5 inches or something like that on all fours. So he was a pretty tall guy. But again, there's also other breeds like Irish and Irish Deerhound and Scottish.
I'm sure the Great Dane probably still thought it was like a lab animal.
Yeah.
Whenever we take, we see all kinds of breeds here at our campus. How do you take breeding into consideration when doing exams or adoptions?
Yeah. So when we do our examinations, some of the main things that we consider for breeds are anxiety level, and then, so we actually have a score. It's called the Fear, Anxiety, Stress score, and it also touches in a bit on aggression as well. And so we use that when considering how we score them. The breeds come into play when we're assessing how we want to handle them as they stay in the shelter in the hospital. We also assess just their breed characteristics as well, because we might want to make sure that Huskies get more exercise than, say, one of the little pocket pups that wants to just sit in your lap all day. But yeah, there's plenty of ways that we have to consider all of those things.
Obviously, when a Chihuahua comes in, it's a little bitey and stuff. We're not going to determine that as like aggressive. We just know that's like
Correct.
How they are with stress. Is there any signs behind them being so feisty? Or is it just from their lack of size they need to show off?
Yeah, We'd have to look into the history of the Chihuahua. That one I can't answer right off the top of my head, but we do know that they tend to be pretty feisty when we see them.
And in the beginning, you kind of mentioned, the history and that after so many, generations, some of them have kind of been lost or not as strong. So does breed still play a key role in the personality, or how does that play?
Yeah, I think it still does quite a bit. Absolutely. We do have mixed breeds and things that we've been seeing lately, and so one of the prime ones would be the doodles, right? Golden doodles, labradoodles, and essentially when they first began, they were mixed breeds between the lab and the poodle, or the golden and the poodle, or something else of that nature. And now we've started crossing those together, and so we're getting closer and closer to like a defined breed. And so what we're finding is that they tend to have variable traits based on one of the original dog lines that they were bred with. So some of the doodles are very friendly, very happy, very loving, just like say a lab or a golden. And some of them are super agile, super sporty, just like the poodle would have been. And so we can see it kind of alter a bit as time goes, but some of those traits still stick. Like even though that one is technically originally a mix, you can still see some of those lab and poodle and golden traits pop out.
And if we're wanting, to adopt, how should breed help us determine which pet is best for us?
Yes, $1 million question, right? And so really, and there's lots of places that you can find information like this, but energy level should be compatible. Family friendliness should be compatible, and these vary across breeds. House protection, or like being concerned with like their own territories and things, should be something you look into and see how you need an animal to be versus what some of these different breeds do, and you can find your right fit. Say that you would rather, Netflix and watch movies all day. We may not necessarily want a Malinois to go home without knowing that it'll get some exercise, right? So there's just a bunch of ways to make sure you're perfectly compatible with whichever one you choose. Or say you want your Malinois and you want to start working out. Okay, by all means have it, right? But they are going to need exercise, so just being mindful of some of those types of things will help you pick your right breed. Alrighty, so with that being said, we have a few things we want to talk about. Don't forget Mason over here, the sweetest boy in the world. You should come by and see him. We are open every day at 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. You can find us at 7007 Old Katy Road. It is the Houston SPCA. And we also have an open house coming up. That is April 1st, a Saturday. So hopefully we see you there. Alrighty, thank you everyone.